On today's episode, I'll be talking about Quentin Tarantino's 1992 breakout hit Reservoir Dogs.
If you're looking for a man with no plans or programs, and he always leaves a chance to hold hands for romance, or you're looking for the Luke with an old man or cold hands, a creature of the night heads for his spotlight, I'm here to welcome you to Brandon at Random Review, a method when I choose. It's Brandon at Random Reviews.
All right, everyone. Welcome to Brandon at Random Reviews, covering one unsystematically chosen topic at a time. If you like listening to a guy recap and review movies in weekly episodes, then look no further. To keep up with the newest content, you can find Brandon at Random Reviews on most major video and audio platforms, as well as all popular social media sites. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe. I use podcasting as a way to infiltrate crime organizations as an undercover police officer. As I mentioned, today's movie is Reservoir Dogs, released on January 21st, 1992, with a runtime of 99 minutes. This movie is rated R by the Motion Picture Association of America, with a budget of $1.2 million. That's kind of in debate. I saw some numbers that said $1.5 million, but it was around that area. Written and directed, of course, by Quentin Tarantino. For the composer, there is no cinematic score for this film. There is a radio show called K. Billy's Super Sounds of the 70s, hosted by comedian Stephen Wright, that serves as the only music for this movie. And for the cast, we have Harvey Keitel, who plays Mr. White. He was in Pulp Fiction, which he has a small part in, but he's very good in it. He's a really enjoyable character. He was also in Mean Streets, which was an early Martin Scorsese movie. I really remember liking that movie, but I barely remember the movie at all. It had Robert De Niro in it, which is kind of a staple of many different Scorsese movies. And he was also in the movie National Treasure, which is a solid popcorn movie if you can overlook Nicolas Cage and some debatable subject matter for the plot. Like, the very premise is kind of insane. Tim Roth plays Mr. Orange, and he was, of course, also in Pulp Fiction. He was a member of the couple who decides to rob the restaurant in the beginning. He was in Rob Roy with Liam Neeson. I believe he was a bad guy in that. It's been a long time since I've seen that movie. It's pretty enjoyable. I like it a lot, but it'll probably be a while before I cover that movie for this podcast. And he was also in Planet of the Apes from 2001, the Tim Burton remake. That one is it's just notoriously awful is what I wanted to say. It's just not very good, and that's my opinion as well as many other people's opinion who saw it. Michael Madsen plays Mr. Blonde, and he was in Wyatt Earp. I don't remember who he played in that, but basically that came out at about the same time. I talked about it on my Tombstone episode. It's got a lot of the same characters and subject matter and events that are covered in Tombstone, but it stars Kevin Costner as Wyatt Earp instead of Kurt Russell, and it was a vastly inferior version of the story. It was just not as well received or liked by most people. He was in Kill Bill Volume 1, and I really like the Kill Bill movies, but they're not my favorite Tarantino movies. They're just good, not as great as I want them to be, mostly because I don't like the kind of movies as well that they are trying to emulate in a lot of ways. And he was also in Species, which was kind of a cheesy movie from the 90s, and I can't remember. It's about an alien who looks like a woman, and she breaks out of a testing facility where she's being held captive, and basically she wants to procreate with a human and take over the world, I believe. And it was Natasha Henstridge who plays this woman or this alien woman. And honestly, if it were up to me, I would have basically been the downfall of humanity because she was really attractive. Then we have Chris Penn, who plays Nice Guy Eddie, and he was in True Romance, which is a very solid movie. I definitely intend to cover it on this podcast. Quentin Tarantino also wrote that movie, but he didn't direct it. I think it was a Tony Scott movie, if I recall correctly, and it's really good. It's really enjoyable. It's got Christian Slater and I think Rosanna Arquette, or is it Patricia Arquette? I can't remember, but that's neither here nor there. He was in Footloose with Kevin Bacon, the movie about the town where dancing is not allowed. And basically, Chris Penn plays this bully turned friend of Kevin Bacon's character. And I really enjoy Footloose. I've covered it on this podcast before in my first season. And it's just really enjoyable to me, even though it's kind of ridiculous as a premise. And he was also in Rush Hour. He had a really bit part in that movie, but I really enjoy Rush Hour despite everybody claiming that it really is an offensive movie. It's racially insensitive, blah, blah, blah. It has like big disclaimers on it when it plays on TV now. And I'm just kind of like, meh, I'm not really that bothered, but I'm also not one of the people who is of the race that is being portrayed negatively in the movie. So I guess I can't really talk. Steve Buscemi plays Mr. Pink, and he was famously in Fargo. He was arguably the best, if not one of the better parts of Fargo. He is probably the most human of anybody in that movie, just because everybody is so exaggeratedly Minnesotan in that movie for the most part. They all just seem like fake people. They don't seem like they could possibly be real. But I really fucking love Fargo, and that's another one I covered in my first season. He was in Monsters Inc. as he did a voice in that movie because it was computer animated. It was a Pixar movie, and he's a villain in that movie. And honestly, really enjoy Monsters Inc. It's a really solid movie. He was also in The Big Lebowski, and his character Donnie gets a lot of bad treatment, I guess we'll call it, from John Goodman's character Walter in it, and it's a fantastic movie. It was largely overlooked when it first came out, but it's really good. And I think, well, I talked about it on Coen Brothers episode I did with my brother-in-law. Then last but not least, we have Lawrence Tierney, and he plays Joe Cabot. He was in Armageddon. I haven't seen Armageddon in a while. I've only seen it a couple of times, and it's one of those enjoyable popcorn movies. It's like a Michael Bay movie, so it's not too cerebral. It's just really kind of enjoyable, but kind of ridiculous too. But I don't remember him being in this movie at all. He was also in the movie Junior, which I've never seen, that stars Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, and it's about Arnold Schwarzenegger undergoing it's like an experimental procedure where he is able to get pregnant as a man. And can't really say it's ever been that appealing to me, but it is what it is. It's definitely not as good as the movie Twins, that also had the same two main co-stars. And he was also in an early episode of Seinfeld where he played Elaine's dad. And honestly, it was a very memorable episode. It was just because her dad was so aggressively serious and unlikable, and he just made Jerry and George really uncomfortable. So it was really fun to just kind of watch them squirm. Okay, so for casting notes, Michael Madsen wanted the role of Mr. Pink, but Quentin Tarantino insisted that he play Mr. Blonde. And to be clear, a lot of these casting notes are about Mr. Pink or the role of Mr. Pink. John Cryer was asked to audition for the role of Mr. Pink, but he backed out last minute. James Woods was considered for the role of Mr. Pink and a number of other roles, from what I gather, but his agent actually turned it down without telling him. And when James Woods found out about that years later, it was something that bothered him enough that he actually ended up, I believe, firing the agent, but I don't know for sure that that's true. Quentin Tarantino was originally going to play Mr. Pink himself, although he made a point of letting all the other actors audition for the part, and when Steve Buscemi came in to read for the part, Tarantino told him that he really wanted the part for himself and that the only way Steve Buscemi could possibly wrestle it from him was to do a killer audition, to which Buscemi duly complied, and he ended up getting the part, of course. I found this interesting. Viggo Mortensen, George Clooney, Samuel L. Jackson, and David Duchovny all read for roles in the film, and obviously they didn't get them. Most of these guys, I mean, David Duchovny was, I want to say, in Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead by now, but these people were largely not famous at all and had only played small roles and things. And so this would have been really cool if they could have gotten a part, and they would have been great for a lot of different parts in this movie. For the plot synopsis, a gang of diamond thieves regroup after their heist at a jewelry store goes horribly wrong, and they seek to find out who sold them out to authorities. For the tagline, seven killers, six colors, and one perfect crime. It's a low budget movie. I can't really fault them for not having better writing on a tagline because honestly, who gives a shit about a tagline? Alright, guys, let's just dive right into the plot of this motherfucking movie. So the movie kicks off with a bunch of guys sitting around a table at a diner, and they're all wearing, for the most part, plain black suits with white dress shirts and black ties. Just plain black ties. Mr. Brown, who is played by Quentin Tarantino himself, is largely leading an argument about the meaning of the song Like a Virgin by Madonna. He argues that the song is actually about a dick, or rather, a large dick. His contention is that it's told from the point of view of a woman who he theorizes has a lot of sex with a lot of different guys, but then she has sex with someone who is particularly well endowed, and the experience is like having sex for the very first time because it is so much more fulfilling and she really feels it because it's actually painful for her. An older gentleman named Joe, who is played by Lawrence Tierney, is going through a small black address book as he sits at the table. This was a very common thing in the pre cell phone era, basically, before everybody and their brother had a cell phone of their very own where they could store all of their phone numbers. A lot of people had these tiny little address books that they could carry around with them and get in contact with people that they knew at the drop of a dime, because if you didn't have something like this, you had to memorize all the phone numbers. And I can tell you, I had a ton of phone numbers memorized at this time, and I have almost none other than my immediate family's phone numbers memorized now. So Joe is looking for certain names, like someone named Toby, and he's doing it with a lot of thinking out loud and whatnot. And suddenly, Mr. White, who is played by Harvey Keitel, reaches over and snatches the book from Joe. And Joe is, of course, irritated by this and tells Mr. White to hand the book back to him. But Mr. White just denies him this whole thing. Like, he's like, no, I don't think so. Mr. White explains that he's been having to listen to this Madonna conversation in one ear, and then he's had to listen to Joe carry on about random names in the other ear, and he's had enough of it. Mr. Blonde, who is played by the late great Michael Madsen, jokingly offers to shoot Mr. White on Joe's behalf for being so disrespectful with this address book. Nice guy Eddie, played by Chris Penn, chimes in to ask if anyone else has been listening to this local radio show where they've been playing 70s hits. And Mr. Pink, who's played by Steve Buscemi, chimes in and mentions that he heard a song that he hadn't heard since grade school on there, and he's really been enjoying some of the songs they've been playing. He explains that they played, or rather, I should say, Eddie explains that they played The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia by Vicki Lawrence, and he didn't realize that, spoilers for that song, the woman singing the song is revealed to have committed the murders discussed in the lyrics, and she confesses in the last verse. Like, he just says that he never really paid attention to the end of the song, or he just zoned out or something. And I'm just going to briefly summarize the events of this song so it's a little more clear. It's sung from the perspective of a sister, and she explains that her brother returned from being out of town for like 2 weeks, and he went to a bar when he got back into town and ran into his best friend Andy, who confessed to him that the brother's wife had slept with someone else while the brother was away. Then, upon the brother getting angry about hearing this, Andy reveals that he had also slept with his wife. Andy proceeded to go home after this, and the brother then left the bar in anger and went home to an empty house and just assumed that his wife had left town out of guilt to just not have to be confronted by him if he found out. The brother retrieved a gun while he was at home and left there, clearly with the intention of going to Andy's house to kill him. And on the way to Andy's house, the brother saw footprints on the ground that were too small in size for Andy to have made. But when the brother got to Andy's house, he arrived to find out that someone had already killed Andy, and this brother just started to panic because it was basically like, oh fuck. Even though I was planning to kill Andy, I didn't kill him, and someone else did, and I'm probably going to get blamed for it. So the brother turned around and saw a sheriff driving down the road, and the brother just fired his gun into the air to get the sheriff's attention. And when the sheriff approached and saw what had happened, he assumed the brother had just committed the murder, and so did the judge and jury at the trial. But the sister singing the song and telling all of the story reveals in the last verse that they ended up hanging her brother before she could confess to what she had done. And she also proclaimed to confess to having murdered, or no, she proceeded to confess to having murdered her brother's wife and hidden the body. And she basically is just really fucking bold about saying that no one will ever find her body because she hid it so well. So, Nice Guy Eddie is saying that he had apparently heard the song multiple times, but he had never really paid attention to the lyrics, particularly at the end of the song. And everyone kind of gives him a hard time about it because that's kind of a big thing to miss in that song, to like not find out what actually happened. Joe goes up to pay the bill at the front counter, and he just tells everyone that's sitting there to chip in for the tip. And as everyone begins throwing in $1 or so apiece, Mr. Pink just sits there and doesn't really do anything, and Nice Guy Eddie calls him out and tells him to chip in with a tip. And all he's asking for is like $1 from him. And even then, that would have been a pretty high percentage of what was likely a pretty cheap meal. It's still like, come on, dude, just fucking tip. Mr. Pink explains that he doesn't tip out of principle, or at least that he only tips for exceptionally good service, but he doesn't believe in the concept of tipping just by default. And for those of you who don't live in America, restaurants are able to pay waitstaff significantly less than standard minimum wage because in America it's so customary to tip. Basically, the amount of money that waitstaff gets from tips offsets how much less they get paid by wages. Tipping is usually based on a percentage of the bill, and that percentage varies between generations and people depending on what they believe is fair. Usually the number is roughly 15 to 20%, and although it's supposed to be based on service, it seems to be pretty common for people to just tip how they tip one way or the other. And also, that percentage number has increased a bit over time. Everyone chimes in to ridicule Mr. Pink for not tipping, arguing that tips are how a waitress typically makes the bulk of her income. Eddie asks Mr. Pink if he never tips at all, and Mr. Pink clarifies that he only tips when he feels that the waitress has gone above and beyond to provide exceptional service. Mr. Pink goes on to explain that their waitress has not met his standard to merit a tip as she hasn't refilled his coffee enough. He says that she's only refilled it 3 times since they've been there, and he would really like for her to have refilled it at least 6 times. But there is a part of this where Mr. Pink mentions that waitstaff make minimum wage, and it's not clear if this is actually true in some areas of the country or if it's a result of him being misinformed, because there is still a minimum wage that you have to pay waitstaff, even though it's lower than the standard minimum wage for non-waitstaff people. Mr. Blonde suggests that perhaps the waitress was too busy to refill Mr. Pink's coffee that much, but Mr. Pink doubles down by saying that a waitress should never be too busy for something like that, and that shouldn't even be in her vocabulary, basically. Mr. White takes exceptional offense to Mr. Pink's philosophy and explains that many non college graduate women can work as waitresses and still earn an acceptable living, but only if they receive the customary tips that come with it, and he explains that their tips are also taxed. But Mr. Pink explains that there is a societal double standard because not everyone who serves people food is considered tip-worthy by society and it's not fair. He clarifies that it does suck that their tips are taxed, but he says that that's not his fault, and basically, if he needs to sign some kind of petition or something, that he'll do that, but that doesn't mean he's just going to play ball with what society says he should be doing. Mr. Orange, who's played by Tim Roth, chimes in and says that he has been won over by Mr. Pink's argument and he wants his dollar back, but Eddie shoots him down, and then Joe comes back from paying the bill, prepared to leave, but he notices that there isn't enough money on the table for the tip, and he asks what the deal is, and Mr. Orange immediately fucking sells out Mr. Pink to Joe, essentially sharing the whole argument with him before Joe tells him to shut up so Mr. Pink can actually say his piece. Joe insists that everyone has to tip because he paid for all of their breakfasts, and he doesn't care what Mr. Pink would normally do in this situation. And Mr. Pink finally coughs up his dollar, and everyone gets up to leave. Stephen Wright's voice kicks in as the opening credits start and the song Little Green Bag by the George Baker Selection begins playing, and we get an iconic shot of the group of men in their suits leaving the restaurant and walking down the road in slow motion. Most of them are wearing sunglasses. The slow motion is a little choppy, but keep in mind, this movie didn't have a great budget. Only Joe and his son Eddie are the ones that are not dressed up. Eddie is in a tracksuit, and Joe is just in a button-down dress shirt of some sort. I want to clarify that Joe hired the group of men in the suits to carry out a heist of a jewelry store, and he gave them all code names. And this movie is structured in an unconventional way and does not get told in chronological order. The main plot of this movie is in the aftermath of the heist, and it continually flashes back to tell the story of how some of the men were hired and gives a little exposition about their backstories. I can't say for sure that no movie had ever done something like this before this movie did, but this movie certainly popularized it, and the storytelling style has become very commonplace in modern cinema, basically to the point that I almost forget that it's not something that's always been a thing, and that this movie kind of made that a cool thing to do with movies, because it gets done a lot, and it's to the point where it doesn't even get pointed out as much that movies are doing it because it's so frequently a choice of the director or the writer of the movie. The song continues to play as the opening credits are projected on a black screen. As the song fades out, we begin to hear Mr. Orange crying out in pain, and Mr. White is trying to comfort him and convince him to just hold on. It finally cuts to reveal that Mr. Orange is laying in the backseat of Mr. White's car and has been shot in the gut, and his blood is all over the white upholstery. Orange is quite convinced that he is likely to die as a result of his injuries and is expressing as much to Mr. White, but White does not really want to accept this. He's not really giving up on Mr. Orange's well-being just yet, or at least he doesn't want Orange to know that maybe he's accepted this and is trying to convince him that it's not as bad as it seems. It's very clear that Orange is in a ton of pain and he's crying out and talking in a high-pitched voice about how fucked he is, and White assures him that Orange is not a doctor and doesn't know the real prognosis for him, and forces Orange to affirm that it's going to be okay. White takes Orange to a warehouse and brings him inside from the vehicle, and this warehouse is a planned rendezvous point for the group of men after the heist is completed for them to basically get back together and regroup. Once the two men make it inside, Orange lays in White's arms and White assures him Joe is on his way, but Orange says that he is scared for his own fate. Even though Orange pleads with him to take him to a hospital, White says that he can't do that, obviously because it would get both of them arrested most likely. Orange tells White that he wouldn't even have to take him inside and he could just leave him out front, and he doesn't really care about going to jail, but White still refuses. He desperately proclaims to White that he won't tell them anything or sell anybody out if White just takes him to get medical treatment. And then White tries to convince Orange that although getting shot in the gut is among the most painful places on the body to have that happen, it takes a long time to actually die from it. And I googled this because I didn't know how true this actually was, and I kind of doubted it was true. But that was actually a bad call because when I Googled it, Google just kind of assumed that I was considering self harm or that I was perhaps committing some sort of other crime. But ultimately, I determined that this would be something that White probably couldn't know super well. But basically, if he was going to die from it, if it like hit an artery or something when he got shot, he probably would have already been dead. And so it's reasonable probably for someone to think that he might be able to make it a while longer, but it's not clear. Mr. Pink shows up at the warehouse and he is very frazzled by whatever happened with the jewelry store heist. He asked White what happened to Brown, and White reveals that Brown was killed. We get some exposition from Mr. Pink about how the police suddenly arrived very quickly to the jewelry store, and he suggests that it was suspicious how fast they were all there with several patrol cars as soon as they were. He explains that in his experience, you have roughly 4 minutes after an alarm starts to sound before that many police should actually show up. He says that there were two waves of police cars. The second one seems to be like they were responding to the alarm, and it kind of made sense what their timing was. But he believes that the first wave was staking out the jewelry store, waiting for the robbery to happen. And he kind of theorizes that there's a possibility that they were set up because it's just that's what it seems like. Mr. White says that he hadn't really thought about that possibility because he's been preoccupied taking care of Mr. Orange with his gunshot wound. They proceed to leave Mr. Orange laying on the floor, and Mr. White and Mr. Pink head over to the bathroom and continue discussing this possibility. As Mr. White tries to get Mr. Pink to just calm the fuck down, the two of them light up cigarettes, and Mr. White tries to go through everything that happened to figure out what went wrong. The two of them dispute at what point the police actually originally arrived, like that first wave to the scene. Mr. White feels certain that as soon as the alarm went off, they were there, but Mr. Pink asserts that the police did not show up until after Mr. Blonde went crazy and started firing his gun. Mr. White asks Mr. Pink how he managed to get out of there alive, and Mr. Pink claims that he just started shooting his way out after the initial shooting from Mr. Blonde began happening. Cuts to a flashback of Mr. Pink fleeing from uniformed police officers on foot on a sidewalk, and he gets hit by a car at an intersection. And although he rolls up onto the hood and breaks the windshield, he's basically uninjured. He holds up his gun to the driver and gets her out of the vehicle and has a shootout with three officers that were pursuing him, who emerge at the corner before he steals her car. And he manages to drive off despite barely being able to see through the broken windshield, in combination with one officer continuing to fire shots at him as he drives away. It cuts back to the warehouse, and Mr. Pink claims he killed a couple of cops, and Mr. White also admits to killing some cops, but neither of them killed any civilians, at least not that they're admitting to. The two of them share in their disbelief over the behavior of Mr. Blonde, who clearly did a bit of a wild card type thing and flew off the handle in the heat of the moment. Mr. White explains that he can't wrap his head around the irrational behavior of Mr. Blonde and says that the two of them are lucky they didn't fall victim in the crossfire and get hit by a bullet or something. They're both frustrated that Joe would have even hired someone like that who would put them all at risk in such a way. Mr. Pink rants about how it's completely understandable for somebody to get nervous or to panic in that kind of situation, but he says that it should be internalized and not result in some kind of shooting rampage, which is fair. I mean, honestly, you probably shouldn't just be that ready to fucking start shooting, but whatever. Neither of them claim to have any idea what happened to Mr. Blonde or Mr. Blue because the scene was total chaos, but it seems unlikely that anyone else would have lucked out as well as Mr. Pink did and managed to get away. Mr. White asks if Mr. Pink thinks that it's possible either of the two men who are not accounted for might have possibly escaped with the diamonds and fled, but Mr. Pink says no because he in fact has the diamonds, and he says that he stashed them somewhere, and he offers up the idea that the two of them could just go get them and get the fuck out of Dodge, mostly because Mr. Pink just firmly believes that it's a bad idea to actually stay at this rendezvous point, since it seems pretty likely that someone on the inside must have tipped off the cops and that the cops likely know about the warehouse as well. He goes on to say that even though Mr. Blonde and Mr. Blue don't know any of their real names, if they're getting questioned by police, it's plausible that they could divulge the plan regarding meeting at the warehouse and all of that stuff. And basically, like, if they've already been questioning these guys, if they like apprehended them at the scene, that's kind of what he's theorizing. Mr. White mentions that he believes he might be jinxed because a couple of jobs ago it was discovered that one of the men on the team was actually an undercover cop, and he says that the guy was found out in time, but it was a very close call and it just has really hung over his head. Mr. Pink begins trying to hypothesize who might have ratted them out, and he begins to think that Joe seems like a potential candidate because he did set up the entire job and kind of got everybody together for it. But Mr. White really doesn't want to believe that because he's known Joe for a really long time, and Mr. Pink says that he's also known Joe for a really long time too, but it's not out of the question that he could have done this. Mr. Pink claims that even Mr. White could be the rat, which Mr. White takes offense to, obviously, and then Mr. White accuses Mr. Pink of possibly being the rat, and instead of being offended, Mr. Pink just says that Mr. White's now using his head because he should be suspicious of everyone, including Mr. Orange. But Mr. White doesn't agree with this because he saw Mr. Orange take the bullet to his stomach, and he believes that that kind of rules him out as a potential informant because he wouldn't have basically put himself in harm's way like that if that was the case. It flashes back to Mr. White meeting with Joe about this job, and as he said, he knew Joe prior to this, and so they're not meeting for the first time here, and they do a bit of catching up regarding what Mr. White has been up to, and it seems like he's a career criminal, and he reveals that his frequent accomplice left the life of crime for whatever reason, and he doesn't work with him anymore because of that. He asks Joe about this new job, and Joe describes it as a 5-man job where the intention is to rob a diamond wholesaler. The two of them talk about being able to move the diamonds if they're successful in obtaining them, because apparently that can be very difficult to do. And I want to be clear, I say that completely just based on this. I've never robbed or considered robbing any person or establishment, and I don't know a whole ton about it other than what I've learned in the movies or what I can ascertain from intuition. Thank God I cleared that up because I'm sure everyone thought that I was a total fucking mob enforcer or some kind of fucking criminal. Joe explains that it'll be tough robbing the store because it'll have to happen during the day, in the daylight, and they'll have to deal with a crowd of people potentially as it's during business hours. And he says that the business has roughly 20 employees working there at any given time. And although they usually deal in the uncut diamonds, that day they'll be getting a shipment of polished stones from Israel that are intended to be shipped to Vermont. Mr. White eventually asks how much his cut of the job will be, and although Joe doesn't actually give a number, he just says that it will be juicy. It cuts back to the warehouse, and Mr. Pink tells Mr. White that he's going to leave because he thinks it's crazy to stick around there knowing that the cops could just arrive there any fucking minute. He comes to the main room of the warehouse near the entrance where Mr. Orange is laying, and Mr. White is examining his state. Mr. Pink fears that Mr. Orange has already succumbed to his wound, but Mr. White looks at him and explains that he's just unconscious and he's not dead, but he soon will be without medical attention. Mr. Pink clarifies that they clearly can't take him to a hospital, but Mr. White's real hang-up is that he was to blame for Mr. Orange getting shot, so he kind of feels personally responsible for making sure he gets help. He rants to Mr. Pink about how it's a matter of principle and that he feels bad that the actions that he followed through with caused this whole thing to happen with Mr. Orange. Mr. Pink asks him what he's proposing, and Mr. White says that he thinks if they could talk to Joe, Joe could probably arrange for some kind of doctor to treat Mr. Orange and possibly save his life. But it's important to remember that this takes place in 1992, and cell phones were around, but were certainly very rare, and most average people didn't have them. Mr. Pink says that even if Joe can be trusted, he's supposed to be at the warehouse already, and it's likely that if he arrives, he's not going to be too pleased with what has happened with this whole heist going wrong. Mr. White explains that Mr. Orange begged him to take him to a hospital regardless of the risks, and Mr. Pink concedes that if that's what he wanted them to do, then they could just take him to a hospital, since he doesn't know anything about either of them anyway. But Mr. White clarifies that in the panicked ride back to the warehouse, when Mr. Orange was in the back seat, he divulged his first name to comfort Mr. Orange. Mr. Pink is incredibly frustrated that Mr. White would have actually done this, and then Mr. White reveals that when they first met each other, he actually revealed to Mr. Orange where he was from as just casual conversation. And of course, Mr. Pink is furious to hear this because Mr. Orange seemingly has enough information on Mr. White to likely identify him because the authorities probably have a rap sheet on Mr. White where he's from, and Mr. White admits that this is true. The two of them argue over who should have done what, and Mr. Pink explains that there is absolutely no way they can take Mr. Orange to a hospital now, knowing what they know. And when Mr. White explains that he'll die if he doesn't get to a hospital, Mr. Pink kind of callously just says, tough luck. Mr. White punches Mr. Pink, and as Mr. Pink is laying on the ground, Mr. White begins kicking him repeatedly until the two of them pull their pistols on each other. And as the two of them are there in a standoff with Mr. White standing over Mr. Pink explains that because of what information Mr. White gave out that he wasn't supposed to, it's plausible that they could figure out who all of the men involved in the heist were. The camera slowly tracks backward or zooms out, I can't really tell. The shot backs up far enough to reveal that a man is standing there with dark hair and he's watching them in a suit sipping on a fast food fountain drink. The man suddenly interrupts their argument and it's revealed to be Mr. Blonde. Mr. Pink stands up and asks Mr. Blonde if he knows what happened to Mr. Blue, and then as Mr. Blonde stands there in silence, Mr. Pink explains that Mr. Brown was killed and that Mr. Orange took a gunshot to the belly at some point. Then, as Mr. Blonde continues to just stand there and not really say anything at all or answer any of their questions, Mr. White goes on the offensive and calls Mr. Blonde an asshole. The two of them explain to Mr. Blonde that they believe the warehouse is compromised and that it's not safe for them to really stay there, but Mr. Blonde says that nobody's going fucking anywhere. Mr. White criticizes Mr. Blonde for his actions at the Diamond Exchange and says that Blonde's reckless behavior almost got him killed, and he says that he would have never worked with him if he would have known what kind of man he was. But Mr. Blonde claims that his actions were justified because they set off the alarms, and in the moment, Mr. Blonde is frustrated by being threateningly ranted at, says his iconic line, "Are you gonna bark all day, little doggy, or are you gonna bite?" As their argument reaches a fever pitch, Mr. Pink intervenes and tells them to just stop fighting with each other. Then Mr. Pink proceeds to throw around a notorious racial epithet that I don't condone using. The gist of his statements is to proclaim that they need to stick together and stop fighting. I didn't want to not mention that and just gloss over it because I want to be clear, like if you've never seen this movie, that word does get used and it is offensive to a lot of people, obviously, so I didn't want to just not mention that it gets said. The two of them calm down quite a bit, but Mr. White is clearly still on edge and angry, but Mr. Blonde seems unfazed by their whole interaction, and he's just very lightheartedly ribbing Mr. White. Blonde tells the two of them that he has something outside that he wants to show the two of them, and after a little bit of back and forth, he convinces the two of them to follow him after assuring them that they will like what they see. As he walks them out to his car, he mentions that he spoke with nice guy Eddie and that Eddie will be there soon and said for them to just stay put. Blonde opens his trunk with his key, and the three of them look down at what's inside and smile as it's revealed that Mr. Blonde actually kidnapped a police officer after the heist as a means of like getting away, I guess. It's not really clear exactly how that went down. It flashes back to when Mr. Blonde met with Joe regarding this job, and his real name is revealed to be Vic Vega, and he just got out of prison, and it seems like he was likely in there as a result of some thing that happened previously where he might have been working for Joe. It's not clear if it was a job or not, and he just got caught by police and ended up going to jail. But Joe says, he makes mention of the fact that he was sending Vic packages while Vic was on the inside, just to let him know how much he appreciated Vic's sacrifice. So it's pretty clear that, like, Vic didn't sell Joe out to the cops or anything. And they talk about how Vic's parole officer is a fucking asshole a little bit, even though it seems like every parole officer is an asshole, and they probably are, but also, like, it's pretty possible that this is also being filtered through the opinions of people who are in jail and don't like the authoritative way that POs are going to be. Anywho, then Eddie shows up, who is Joe's son, to be clear, and it's revealed that him and Vic are also pretty close, and Eddie is just relieved to see Vic as a free man again, and Vic proceeds to break Eddie's balls by pretending like him and Joe were just going on about what a fuck up Eddie is, and even though they weren't actually doing that. And then the two of them kind of wrestle on the ground a bit playfully before Joe finally puts an end to their shenanigans. Joe explains to Eddie that they were just talking before he arrived about Vic's parole officer, and Vic explains that he would like to come back to work for them, but he kind of has to prove himself to his PO that he can hold down a regular job for a while before he does anything out of line that might get him in trouble. Eddie shares an idea about setting Vic up as a dock worker, and Vic doesn't really like the idea too much until Eddie reveals that it would only be on paper to make the PO believe that he's actually working there. And then they kind of elaborate on how it'll work and how Vic will have a time card that'll be punched in and out for him by somebody that works there. And there'll be people that will vouch for him that work there also. And they'll have plenty of excuses if the PO just shows up at the dock to ask where Vic is and see him and talk to him. And they can basically just say, oh, he had to make a trip to here to take something, as part of his work. Vic explains that he's very appreciative of the two of them looking out for him, but he wants to know when he can actually get back to doing some real work for them. Joe is apprehensive about the idea and says that it's not a great time for that, but Eddie stops him and says that he'd like to get him on the diamond job. He explains that Vic will be great for it because he can handle himself and he knows that he can be trusted. And Vic agrees to take the job, and the screen just fades to black as the radio DJ kicks back in to announce another song from the Sound of the 70s show. As another song kicks in, it cuts to Eddie driving around, talking on his cell phone to someone about needing to handle the situation with the botched heist. So this is back to, like, the present of them being at the warehouse. Then it promptly switches back to the warehouse where the three men are taking the police officer from Mr. Blonde's trunk and bringing him inside, kicking him around a little bit, whatnot. As they continue abusing the officer, it keeps cutting back to Eddie on the phone, talking about everything that's happened and what he knows. And the officer's hands are still tied, and they hang him up on a hook and continue hitting him repeatedly. White and Pink finally drag him over to a chair, and Mr. Blonde begins duct taping him to it. They continue abusing the officer while he's restrained to the chair, and they're trying to get some information out of him, and he claims that he doesn't know anything. Eddie shows up at the warehouse and walks inside and sees what they're doing, and Mr. Pink immediately begins explaining to him that they were set up at the Diamond Exchange and that somebody had tipped the cops off about what was going on there. Eddie gets exceptionally defensive about this and doesn't believe that there might be a rat in their midst, and is adamant that he didn't sell anybody out himself, certainly. Eddie explains that he talked to a man named Dove, but he hasn't actually spoken directly to his father, Joe. But he says that Dove told him simply that Joe was on his way to the warehouse and that Joe was very angry. Eddie asks why they're beating on the officer who is tied to the chair, and Mr. Pink says that their intent was to find out if he knew who the informant was. And then Eddie angrily explains that in this situation, the officer might eventually desperately claim to know something just to give them some kind of information to satisfy them in hopes that they'll stop, but that doesn't necessarily mean that whatever he says would actually be truthful. Mr. White angrily asserts that Joe might be angry, but he is nowhere near as angry as Mr. White is with Joe for having hired Mr. Blonde for the job. Mr. Blonde defends himself by saying that he instructed the people at the heist not to sound the alarm, but they did it anyway, and that was the last straw and the only reason he began shooting. Then finally, Eddie tells him the whole plan, which was to have Mr. Blonde stay there to watch the police officer and Mr. Orange, who's still laying there on this little ramp dying. And Eddie says that he intends to have Mr. White and Mr. Pink accompany him outside so that they can get rid of the vehicles that are out there, because it'll look very suspicious with all of them parked there, especially with the state that the vehicles are in, and it will also upset his father. As the three of them leave, Mr. Blonde walks up to the officer bound to the chair, and he begins chatting with him a little bit, and the officer reiterates that he doesn't know anything about a setup because he's only been on the police force for like 8 months, and they really don't tell him anything yet. And he explains to the officer that it doesn't really matter whether he tells him anything or not, because he's still planning to torture him either way. Then he explains that the best the guy can do is pray for a quick death, but he says that he isn't going to get that. And Mr. Blonde pulls his gun on him and points it at his head, and the officer begins squirming around helplessly, just trying to avoid getting shot, even though it's not like it's going to do anything. And Mr. Blonde just laughs at him and walks over to the radio, and he pulls this old-fashioned shaving razor, like a single blade razor, out of his boot and folds it open, or unfolds it, I should say. He asks him if he's ever listened to K. Billy's Sounds of the 70s, and he turns on the radio and tunes it to the right station just as the song is being introduced, and it's the song Stuck in the Middle with You by Steelers Wheel. I don't know if it's Stuck in the Middle or Stuck in the Middle with You. I want to say it's the second, but who knows. As the song picks up and begins playing, Mr. Blonde dances and sings along as he approaches the officer again, just after checking on Mr. Orange on the floor. Blonde walks up with the razor and holds the officer's face to keep him still as he begins to use the razor on him. The camera deliberately shifts away so that you can't really see what he's doing to the guy, and you can only hear him just telling the officer to hold still as the officer groans with his face taped shut, or his mouth taped shut, excuse me. As Mr. Blonde walks back into the frame, his hands and the razor are covered in blood, and he's holding a very bloody ear in his hand, and he walks back over to the officer and begins taunting him by asking him if he can hear him by talking into the severed ear. And then he walks out to his car to retrieve a can of gasoline from the trunk, and then he walks back inside, and the same song's still playing as he walks back in, and he begins dancing again and starts just splashing the gasoline casually all over the officer, and his screams are still muffled because of the tape on his mouth. And then Blonde removes the tape, and the officer immediately begins yelling "stop" over and over, and Mr. Blonde asks him if that stings a little bit before splashing more gasoline on him, and he begins dribbling it on the floor in a trail away from the officer, like he's basically making a trail so he can light the trail and set the officer on fire. And as Mr. Blonde lights his Zippo and holds it in his hand and continues talking, the officer is pleading with him that he has a little kid at home, and Mr. Blonde doesn't give a shit. He just asks him if he's all through talking. Then suddenly, Mr. Blonde gets shot in the chest, and it's revealed that Mr. Orange has woken up and fires several more shots at him before he collapses onto the ground. This is Mr. Orange is continuing to fire more shots at him. Mr. Orange and the officer breathe hard and look at each other without speaking for a few moments, and Mr. Orange asks him what his name is, and the officer says his name is Marvin Nash, and Mr. Orange explains to him that he is a cop, and Marvin says that he knows that, and he knows that Mr. Orange's real first name is Freddy, but that's all he really knows about him. Mr. Orange seems a little shocked that Marvin was aware of this, as he lays there covered in just a ton of blood at this point. Marvin explains that the two of them were introduced about 5 months prior, but Mr. Orange doesn't remember this at all. Marvin asks him how he looks, and Mr. Orange kind of chuckles as he looks over at Marvin, and he says he doesn't know what to tell him because he obviously doesn't look particularly good right now that his ear has been removed. And then Marvin begins complaining about what a sick fuck Mr. Blonde was, and Mr. Orange explains to him that he just needs to remain calm because there are officers waiting a block away to move in, and Marvin asks what they're waiting for almost immediately. And then Marvin goes on this angry rant about how he got his ear cut off and he's deformed now, but Mr. Orange angrily screams at him that he's fucking dying, and Marvin can just fuck off with his complaints. Like he can still live at this point, and if Marvin doesn't get actual medical attention right away, he's still going to survive, but if Mr. Orange doesn't, he will not survive. Mr. Orange clarifies that the officers were instructed not to move until Joe Cabot showed up at the location because that was the whole purpose of Mr. Orange being sent undercover, which was to catch Joe. He tells Marvin to just sit tight until Joe walks through the door, and then it flashes back, and Mr. Orange, who is, as I mentioned, Freddy, that's his real name, is entering a diner, and he eagerly walks up to a man named Holdaway sitting in a booth and tells him that Joe wants him for a job, basically. Like, it's a very exciting moment for him because he's been working on gaining some trust. Holdaway is skeptical at first, thinking Freddy might be joking, but Freddy sits down and tells him the story of how it happened, and he says that Eddie wanted him to meet Joe and told him to sit at home and wait for the call. After 3 days of waiting, Freddy received a call, and 15 minutes later, Eddie came to pick him up and took him to a restaurant in Gardenia. He explains how he met a guy named Mr. White there and kind of explains the color-coded names and all that. But he doesn't think that Mr. White was one of the regular guys that Joe had, and he must have been from out of town because he was talking about how the Milwaukee Brewers won the night before and he won some money on the game. Holdaway says that that likely means that Mr. White is actually from Wisconsin, and if they have a rap sheet on him there, they might actually be able to figure out who he really is. Holdaway says that he wants Freddy to look through mugshots of men who were involved in armed robberies in the state to see if they can kind of match a name to the face. Freddy continues on and says that he has had a good experience with a man named Long Beach Mike who has backed up his story and helped him infiltrate Joe's organization, and Holdaway stops him and clarifies to him that Long Beach Mike is not a good guy because he's essentially selling out his friends and he's not to be trusted because he's a scumbag. Then Holdaway asks him if he used the commode story, and it flashes back yet again within this flashback to when Holdaway was giving Freddy the script for this commode story. He explains to him that he has to be an amazing actor to be undercover. He explains that the commode story is just an amusing anecdote about a drug deal that's supposed to have really happened to Freddy, but it's really just made up. As Freddy shows concern about having to actually memorize 4 full pages of dialogue for this, Holdaway ensures him that it's just like memorizing a joke and that all he has to do is remember the important parts, and then, he can just kind of make the rest his own, just make it his own story. He says that Freddy has to know a lot of random details about the bathroom. Basically, he just needs to define it in his head. And he has to know basically the setting of the story, where it takes place, all of this stuff, just to make it more believable. So if he gets asked questions while he's telling the story, he can actually elaborate and things like that. So basically, we get a nice sequence where Freddy is trying to memorize the story and also figure out how he wants to tell it, and he's working out the kinks in it as he goes along, and it kind of transitions to him actually telling the story in front of Joe, Mr. White, and Eddie. And I'm not going to share all of the finer details of the story, but it was about how he was dealing weed during a time when it was really hard to get weed, and he was supplying his friends, and he went into this train station to meet with someone to sell it. So he had the weed on him, and then he walks into the bathroom, and there are 4 uniformed police officers and a German Shepherd drug sniffing dog in there waiting. And it's pretty obvious that the officers were talking to each other, and they stopped what they were talking about as Freddy walked in, and the dog just begins barking at Freddy as well. And although Freddy is clearly nervous, the officers think nothing of it, seemingly, and tell the dog to just shut up. And one of the officers continues telling their story about some traffic stop. And although in his mind Freddy feels like they're watching him closely, he ends up walking away without any issue by playing it cool. It cuts back to the diner where Freddy is telling Holdaway the story, and he wants to know more about Joe. Holdaway does because he's never actually interacted with him before, so he's hoping to get this info from Freddy. Then Freddy explains that Joe is very similar to the Thing from the Fantastic Four, and it flashes back to the day Eddie and Mr. White came to pick up Freddy from his apartment to take him to meet Joe, and Freddy collects himself before walking out the door, and he like kind of does this affirmation in the mirror, and then as he emerges downstairs, there are these officers staking out behind Eddie's car, like not very far, remarking about how crazy Freddy must be for doing this undercover work. When Freddy gets into the car, it's revealed that Mr. Pink is also in the back seat when he gets in there. The four men have a conversation about how women of different ethnicities behave and how black women just don't put up with the kind of shit that a lot of white women will put up with from their man. Eddie tells a story about a woman he knew whose husband was abusive toward her, and one night when he was passed out, she glued his dick to his stomach and they had to call the paramedics to fix it. Then the four men finally arrive and Joe has them sitting down and he's lecturing them about how he knows that they all like to tell jokes, but they need to get serious so that they don't wind up in prison as a result of not paying attention enough and just dicking around while they were planning the job. He explains that he plans to be all business until the job is done, but then when they're celebrating afterward, he will be happy and joke around with them. He introduces the concept of the aliases with the color code names that he'll be giving them, and he explains to them that he doesn't want any of them talking about anything personal with each other. Mr. Pink asks why he has to be called Mr. Pink, and why can't they just pick their own colors, and Joe explains that that never really works because it just ends up being a bunch of guys who don't really know each other well enough, and they'll all fight over who gets to be Mr. Black. Then Mr. White interjects and tries to explain to Mr. Pink that he shouldn't care what his name is, and Mr. Pink says that's a lot easier for him to say because Mr. White is actually a cool name. And by the way, when I watch these movies, I typically watch them on Amazon Prime with subtitles on because there's also an X-ray menu that allows me to see what actors are on screen with their respective characters at the bottom by the play bar. It's just kind of nice. You can just pause it or press the down button and it'll show the play bar and it'll basically have a list of everyone who is on screen or has recently been on screen, who the actor is, and what character they're playing, so you can just tell who is who, especially early on when you don't know character names. Very helpful. I typically buy all of my digital movies from Fandango, which is just a digital movie and TV show service that just sells them outright. They have like some free movies, but they don't actually have a subscription service. And they usually have the best deals. That's why I go with them. And I actually like their interface a lot better. And then in addition to that, my Movies Anywhere account allows me to sync most of those movies that I buy on Fandango across my other digital video services. But there are some major studios that don't actually participate with Movies Anywhere, like Lionsgate, Paramount, MGM. Just those ones are not included in the syncing across services. But my point was that because I was forced to watch this on Fandango, the closed captions were complete fucking garbage, and I honestly watched so few movies with closed captions on Fandango that I don't know if this was common to see on Fandango or if it was just this particular movie. I like to use closed captioning to make sure I know what everybody says and I don't miss things, but Fandango's captions for this movie were very lazy, and they were, especially through this stretch of the movie, paraphrasing way too many of the lines. It was like they didn't even capture the essence of what was being said on screen because they were shortening it and just, like I said, paraphrasing it, and it was super fucking annoying. Anywho, it cuts to Freddy and Mr. White outside of the Diamond Exchange, and they're just kind of going through each man's responsibility for the day of the job, starting with Mr. Orange, and he's going to guard the vault. That's the plan for Mr. Orange. They discuss some of the contingencies involved regarding the fact that alarms should not go off because they're not actually getting into the display cases, and they also kind of talk about what to do if, for instance, the manager won't give up the diamonds for some reason. Mr. White explains that places like this are heavily insured and the employees are not supposed to resist at all. They're just supposed to give you what you want if you're doing something criminal like this. And then he goes on to say that with most of the regular employees, a simple tough look will dissuade them from behaving in that way. But he does claim that if a manager thinks that they're a cowboy and they want to be tough or be the hero in the moment, then you may have to break at least one of their fingers to keep them in line. I don't know. I don't know that that seems entirely necessary, Mr. White, but okay. And I will say that at least in retail, my experience has been that that is very true, that they are heavily insured and they don't want anybody to try and take the law into their own hands in this kind of situation. You're never supposed to try and stop somebody if you're like working at a grocery store or some kind of business like that where they have stealable goods out in the open. You're basically just supposed to not stop them and just try and get as much identifying information as you can about them so that you can report it to police. It then proceeds to cut to immediately after the heist, and Mr. Brown just crashes the getaway car into a parked car on the side of the street after he rounds a corner, and Mr. Orange and Mr. White are in the back seat with him, and basically the two of them get out of the back seat, and Mr. White walks over by the corner and is dual wielding pistols, and he's just preparing for the police to catch up to them at this corner. Mr. Orange stops to check on Mr. Brown in the front seat, who claims that he's going to go blind or he thinks he has gone blind already. And Mr. Orange just assures him that he just has blood in his eyes and it's not that big of a deal. Then Mr. Orange looks up to see a police cruiser arrive and he watches in stunned silence as Mr. White opens fire and kills the two officers in the front seat. And then Mr. White comes back to him and they look down to see that Mr. Brown seemingly caught a stray bullet to the head, but it's not really clear how that would have happened based on what was going on. And this is kind of one of those things where I'm like, I don't know if it was just not in the budget to get the shot right, or if it's meant to be implied that Mr. Orange might have done that, like if he might have killed Mr. Brown. I have no idea. They do their best to remain casual as they just walk away from this scene, and when they walk out onto a different street, they stop a car by pointing their guns at it and getting in the way of it. But the woman who is driving is immediately reaching into her glove box to retrieve a pistol, and as soon as Mr. Orange opens her door, she shoots him in the stomach, and then he falls back and he shoots her in the chest, and he kind of stifles his visible regret over having to do this to a civilian. Like, obviously, that lady didn't deserve to die, but he kind of had to kill her because that's what he would have done if he actually was a criminal and he wasn't undercover. So he kind of had to keep up the appearance. Then Mr. White runs back around the vehicle and picks up Mr. Orange and throws him in the back seat. And this is essentially where we started after the opening credits, with Mr. Orange just writhing in pain in the back seat and Mr. White's up front driving, trying to comfort him. It cuts back to the warehouse again, and Mr. Pink, Mr. White, and Eddie are returning back to find Mr. Blonde dead on the floor, a victim of several gunshot wounds. And Mr. White asks him what happened, and Mr. Orange just explains that Mr. Blonde cut off the officer's ear and was about to light him on fire. And Eddie looks over at Mr. Orange in disbelief and says, "This cop?" And then he just fires multiple shots at the officer, who is still restrained to the chair, and just clearly kills him without question and doesn't have any hesitation about doing it. Mr. Orange claims that Mr. Blonde was going to kill the officer and then kill Mr. Orange and then ambush the three of them when they returned so that he could just make off with the money on his own and wind up in sunny Mexico, I assume. Because of Mr. White's negative feelings toward Mr. Blonde, based on the things that he did during the heist and the way he was behaving, Mr. White's more than willing to believe that this was actually true. But Eddie knows that this is simply not plausible because he trusted Mr. Blonde and knew him very well, and he knew that this was not the kind of guy he was. Eddie reiterates his interpretation of Mr. Orange's story to ensure that he understands him correctly and he didn't miss anything. And then Mr. Orange swears on his mother's eternal soul that that was what happened. Eddie explains that Mr. Blonde was caught by police at a warehouse years ago, and the warehouse was full of stolen goods, and he could have walked without doing jail time if he would have just ratted out Joe, but he didn't do that. He accepted his fate and did all 4 years of his prison time without selling anybody out, and Eddie just doesn't really believe that someone who is willing to do that would have all of a sudden decided to have a change of heart and betray them instead of doing so earlier when he could have made a number of deals but didn't while he was in prison too. Eddie is clearly very angry and demands that Mr. Orange tell him what really happened, but Joe's voice interrupts as he's just entering the warehouse to see the scene in front of him, and he exclaims that there is no point in listening to Mr. Orange anymore because all he'll have to say will be bullshit. And Eddie tells Joe that he doesn't understand what the hell's going on, and Joe clarifies that Mr. Orange works with the LAPD, and Mr. White quickly argues with Joe that Joe doesn't know what Joe thinks he knows, but he certainly doesn't know what the hell he's talking about because it just doesn't register as a possibility to Mr. White that this could actually be true that Mr. Orange is LAPD. So Joe explains that Mr. Orange was the only member of their team that he wasn't 100% about their background and couldn't fully verify that he wasn't a cop. And he just admits that he probably should have his head examined because he should have just reconsidered Mr. Orange's inclusion in the job altogether because of that uncertainty. Then he pulls his gun on Mr. Orange, and Mr. White then pulls his gun on Joe to defend Mr. Orange, which in turn causes Eddie to pull his gun on Mr. White. Mr. Pink pleads with them that they're all acting crazy and they're really supposed to be professionals, and it's just ridiculous what they're doing. The four men, Joe, Eddie, Mr. White, and Mr. Orange, are all in what is referred to as a Mexican standoff, which is a confrontation in which no one person can attack another without risking their own livelihood in some way. This one is kind of sorta a true example of it. It's kind of an outlier and it still can be classified as one, but technically not everyone is at risk because Eddie doesn't actually have anybody pointing a gun at him, but we'll get back to that. So ultimately, what happens is Joe shoots and kills Mr. Orange first. Then Eddie immediately shoots Mr. White after Mr. White shoots Joe. And Mr. White fires another shot that kills Eddie as well. And I had to Google this, and I ended up finding a Reddit thread in the fan theories subreddit. The first comment explains that the timing of the scene was actually done incorrectly when it was shot, but they couldn't afford to reshoot it. So to watch it, it seems as though no one actually shoots at Eddie and he just collapses like he got shot. And apparently, this whole sequence, it was all timed, and his squib, which is just like the little blood pack on his chest, still went off to make it appear as though he got shot, although it doesn't really look like Mr. White actually fires a second shot. So I just want to clarify that because as I was watching it, and if you watch it for the first time, you may be confused by it too, but it is a well-known continuity type error that basically the way it was supposed to be shown to happen wasn't accurately captured on screen, so that's just why it's a little wonky. But anyway, as all four men who were a part of the standoff lay there, seemingly dead on the ground, Mr. Pink emerges from under the ramp that Mr. Orange was laying on while he was dying virtually the whole time since he's been back at the warehouse. So Mr. Pink is still alive and well, and he slowly walks out and just grabs the bag of diamonds before opening the door and leaving. And then as we look around at all the men laying there, Mr. White is revealed to still be alive, at least for the time being, and he struggles over to be with Mr. Orange. I guess he cradles Mr. Orange in his lap as we hear police sirens outside. There's some yelling, some gunshots, and they're likely directed at Mr. Pink, but we really can't be sure. We don't actually see any of this actually going on. Mr. White laments at the notion that him and Mr. Orange are likely to do a lot of time in prison together, but Mr. Orange suddenly confesses to Mr. White that he's sorry, but he says that he is a cop. And as Mr. White processes this, he turns his gun on Mr. Orange, and the officers break into the warehouse and plead with him just to not kill Mr. Orange. But ultimately, Mr. White just shoots Mr. Orange dead in his lap, and then the cops, you just kind of have to assume that they ended up shooting him. You kind of hear it, but you don't actually see it. And then we roll credits as the song Coconut by Harry Nilsson plays. Solid song, far better album than that song is, but it's a great fucking album. I think it's called Nilsson Schmilson. Fucking solid. Anyway, on to trivia. The film's budget was so low that many of the actors were asked to simply bring their own clothing as wardrobe, most notably Chris Penn's track jacket. The signature black suits were provided for free by the designer based on her love for the American crime film genre. Steve Buscemi wore his own black jeans instead of suit pants, and Michael Madsen wore a jacket and pants that came from two different suits. Mr. Blonde's Cadillac Coupe de Ville belonged to Michael Madsen because the budget wasn't big enough to rent a car for the character, and the same car was also used in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by the character Rick Dalton. That movie was from 2019, by the way. Madonna, who is the main topic of the opening conversation, really liked the film, but refuted Tarantino's interpretation of her song Like a Virgin. She gave him a copy of her erotica album signed, and she wrote, "To Quentin, it's not about dick, it's about love, Madonna." The budget wouldn't cover police assistance for traffic control, so in the scene where Steve Buscemi forces a woman out of her car and drives off in it, he could only do so when the traffic lights were green. According to an interview on the DVD, Michael Madsen says that Kirk Baltz asked to ride in his trunk to experience what it was really like. Madsen agreed, but decided as he went along that this was time for his own character development, so he drove down a long alley with potholes and then stopped at a Taco Bell drive-thru before taking Baltz back to the parking lot and letting him out. Armed with $30,000 and his 16mm camera, Quentin Tarantino was all set to make the film with a bunch of his friends, including his producing partner, Lawrence Bender, who was going to play Nice Guy Eddie. It was then that Tarantino received an answer phone message from Harvey Keitel asking if he could not only be in the film, but help produce it. Keitel had gotten involved via the wife of Bender's acting class teacher, who had managed to get a copy of the script to him. Keitel's involvement helped raise the budget to $1.5 million. See, that's why I say it's kind of in debate what the actual budget was. Tim Roth actually refused to read for the film. He did insist on going out drinking with Quentin Tarantino and Harvey Keitel. After a few hours, Keitel left the two of them alone, and after drinking more, Roth eventually agreed to read for Tarantino when they were both drunk. Mr. Blonde, who is played by Michael Madsen, has the real name Vic Vega. This is the same surname as Vince, who is played by John Travolta from Pulp Fiction. Tarantino has revealed that Vic and Vince are actually brothers, and he also intended to do a prequel to both films called Double V Vega, which would star the Vega brothers, but Madsen and Travolta eventually got too old to reprise their roles in a prequel, and Tarantino has since abandoned the idea. Any possibility of the movie ended when Madsen died in 2025. That was clearly something somebody went to a lot of trouble to go back, because he died like only a few months ago, and they clearly like went to the trouble to go back and edit that, so that's just kind of crazy. Mr. Orange's apartment was the upstairs to the warehouse where most of the movie takes place. The filmmakers redecorated it to look like an actual apartment in order to save money on having to find a real apartment. The film was released in America with almost no promotion, so it did not do that well at the box office. In England, however, it was such a huge hit that Quentin Tarantino would be mobbed as he walked down the street in London. British filmmakers have been influenced by it ever since. I don't know if that is a little too broad of a statement at the end there, but a lot of British filmmakers have been influenced by it since. Quentin Tarantino had to fight Miramax boss Harvey Weinstein to keep the torture scene in the film, as Weinstein felt it would have a serious negative effect on audiences. Tarantino stood his ground, and Weinstein ultimately relented and let him keep it in the movie. Quentin Tarantino added the opening diner scene to give Mr. Blue, played by Edward Bunker, some lines because he was the only character without any. According to Steve Buscemi in a recent podcast interview, everyone had a difficult time with Lawrence Tierney because he was easily distracted and just kept forgetting his lines all the time. Quentin Tarantino and everyone else were so upset with Tierney that Quentin fired him on the third day of filming, and he later rehired him after things kind of cooled down. Alright, on to info and ratings. Opening weekend, 147.8 thousand. Worldwide gross, 2.9 million. IMDb rating 8.3, Letterboxd rating 4.1, Rotten Tomato critics score 90%, Rotten Tomato audience score 94%. Personal rating 5 out of 5 stars. Praise for this movie. Even if this wasn't the first movie to do it, I love the unusual structure of the story where they don't really tell it in chronological order and it kind of bounces around. Obviously, it's a very effective style and it's been replicated many times since. Despite this movie having such a low budget, all of the performances here are stellar for the most part, and they really managed to tell an effective story despite the limitations in the budget. For criticism, honestly, the only complaint I really have is that it seems as though because of the mistake in timing in the standoff during the final scene, it was confusing and it did seem like Eddie didn't actually get shot and just acted like he did, but knowing that it was a budgetary issue, I can't really bitch too much about it. I mean, they legitimately did admit that it was an issue and they actually wanted to fix it, but they weren't able to afford to do so. So I guess them's the breaks, you know what I mean? Alright, guys, thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.
I'm here to welcome you to Brandon at Random Review, a method when I choose. It's Brandon at Random Reviews. What you hoped you would see is half blind with hats tied, with all the dates of release for Footloose, The Dark Knight, the Kurt Russell brain freeze, Rear Windows and Gaslights. I'm Billy and your Meg, Sharon Stone, the legs spread. The park starts with the eggs, it won't stop till you're dead. I'm here to welcome you to Brandon at Random Reviews. No method when I choose. It's Brandon at Random Reviews.